Welcome back to Full Time with Meg Linehan. I am Tamerra Griffin, and I am joined by my co-host, Meg Linehan. And it is NWSL Finals Week. Finally, we've made it. The Orlando Pride and the Washington Spirit will face off this weekend. And in order to prepare, we have enlisted the help of our pals to the pod, Steph of The Athletic, and the executive producer of the show, Emily Olsen, who have been following the Orlando Pride and the Washington Spirit respectively, and will provide some of their insights so that we can be as prepared as we possibly can in this chaotic league for the final. Meg, how are you doing? How are you doing post-semifinal weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we lived 7 different lives this weekend, watching those games between just, Aubrey Kingsbury 3 saves, into Marta doing Marta things, and just all the emotions were had, all of the stress was had. I was watching the Orlando game, and that Marta goal happened, and my wife, who's not a sports person, again, I walked into the kitchen after the game had ended, and I was like, oh, Orlando won. She's like, I could tell. I heard you react to that Marta goal. I was like, okay, thanks. Cool. So, yeah, it's funny because I feel like, no bye week anymore. It just feels like these 3 weeks are all, it's so much is happening. I'm already very tired, and Kansas City is going to be even more tiring. So just, if you see me, hope I have caffeine in my system.
And if she doesn't, maybe
hand me
be
some.
A sport and just, make it happen.
Yeah.
Completely feel you, Meg. It feels very much like an actual academic finals week where it's we're trying to study, we're trying to live in the library, we got our snacks, and things keep happening. Like the fact that this week, Michele Kang made a huge and historic donation to U.S. Soccer, $30 million over the next 5 years that will go toward expanding youth programs, investing in talent identification, coaching, refereeing. This has huge implications for women's and girls soccer across the country, and we will dive deeper into that next week because we can only do so much in one episode, right, Meg?
Yeah, I mean, so many things have happened. Again, we had a U.S. soccer roster, the She Believes Cup announcement. Just, there's been a lot of things, and I'm like, we could be spacing these out a little bit better. I just want to maybe toss that idea out. But I was in New York for the Michele Kang announcement. I spoke to her at length, so we will have plenty of additional coverage. I think it is a really big and important story. Obviously, we've got to get in to the U.S. versus England and Wembley, Netherlands. We've talked about Lily Johannes a little bit on the show before. We've got a lot. We're just going to everybody wait a week. We want to give the NWSL its time to shine this week.
100%. We have got you covered. Do not worry, but we need to give our just due attention to this NWSL Championship because this has been a journey for each of the teams that we are so excited to dive into. But just to be very clear, next week, our episodes will be focused on the U.S. Women's National Team. As Meg mentioned, the roster drops, more on the Michele Kang news, the She Believes Cup. There is so much, but don't worry. Oh, sorry. You were shaking.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm
sorry.
Just
you were shaking your head. I thought I said something wrong.
No, sorry. That's just me being remember when we'd maybe get one news story a day and we could all talk about that and that could be the one story. And now it's 17 things happening all at the same time. So.
But, we're up to the task. This is, in some ways, what we signed up for. And most of this news is good. So definitely can't complain about that. But to stay tuned to all of the stories, all of the games, all of the news, make sure that you're following us on socials if you're not already at TA Fulltime on Instagram and TikTok. Make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter. Email us fulltime@theathletic.com with your thoughts, feelings, so that we can make sure we address as many of your thoughts and questions and concerns as possible. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we are diving into our conversation with Steph about the Orlando Pride and what we can expect from them heading into this NWSL Championship. All right, we are joined by the Athletic staff writer Steph, who has been covering the Orlando Pride very, very closely throughout the season. She was in Florida both for the Pride Shield win in October and that crazy 3-2 victory in their semifinal win over the Kansas City Current. Steph, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Going from 78 degrees and humid in Orlando to like 50 and crisp in New England is a real swing. But, I'm a fall girly. I'm all about it.
Peace be upon your immunity system. I know that's a struggle. The Pride. They have been on a journey the past several years. So for people who have maybe only been following them in the last, let's say 3, maybe since Seb Hines took over the club, or maybe very recently, can you walk us through their sort of origin story and the journey that they've been on to get to the NWSL final?
Ooh, boy. I mean, if you go all the way back to them as like, when they were launched as an expansion team and they had Alex Morgan coming in as their like the marquee player, because this was also the kind of the era of you had to allocate national team stars and they wanted to spread around particularly US national teamers to make sure every team had somebody who kind of helped carry that, PR media weight. I remember there was this like photo shoot with Alex Morgan and Kaylin Kyle, name from the past. It was where they looked vaguely disgusted by something, and I've kept it in my meme folder ever since.
That's in the
instant classic.
Camera roll forever.
Yes. But the point being that they've gone from that. They had Alex Morgan that first year, and then they brought in Marta. I think Marta's been so closely aligned with Orlando for so long, people forget they didn't have her right away, but then they brought her in and you think, oh, okay, they're bringing in these big names, they're clearly setting themselves up for success. That's not what happened if we all look at, the Wikipedia entry. They're a team that has really struggled for a long time, especially pre-Wilf family ownership, to just be consistent on the field, to be competitive. And so I think this latest like Hines, Wilf, Carter, brand new Marta era is, if you have only been a Pride fan, I don't want to say you haven't suffered actually, because the rebuild has begun with the Hines, like in the Wilfs taking over and Haley Carter coming on. But maybe you've only ever experienced that kind of like upward trajectory instead of existing in the years. And it was like, well, this is who we are, I guess. The years of like 3,000-4,000 people in the lower bowl of then Exploria Stadium, now Inter and Co. So that's where they've been, and I feel like it obviously makes it much more impactful to see where they are now coming out of that.
I know we've talked a lot on the show. We had Haley Carter on, so also if you have not listened to that episode, I feel like it's a fun listen back that has aged really well after
Now's
they won the
time.
Shield. But there is the sense of, you talk about Seb Hines coming in, about Haley Carter coming in. We talked to Haley Carter a lot about the finish to the 2023 season that came down to decision day and them missing out. But I think that there's such a thread between what happened last year and moving into this year. So what has that launch point maybe allowed for in 2024 that other teams aren't necessarily working with?
I think that the Pride over the past 2.5 years are going to be a case study in continuity, in getting the hiring right, like really, really right. And lest we forget, Seb Hines was preceded by Amanda Cromwell. So it's not like the Wilfs came in and everything was fine. Like there was a little bit of, like kind of trying to figure out the puzzle pieces and what's going to work and what's not. So, you don't give them too much credit, but I will give them credit. For example, with Hines, we're recording on the day he just won Coach of the Year, right? But if you look at his record from interim and then 2023, if the Wilfs had decided this guy's got to go, we got to find a flashier, maybe the head coach of, I don't know, Barcelona or something, to come coach our team, you had been like, okay, I think that's a justifiable on-field decision. But as ever, we only ever see 10% of what's happening when we're only looking at on the field. And whatever was going on behind the scenes, whatever the work that Seb Hines was doing with the players, I think, he had earned some confidence and some support in those areas that made them say, like, you're going to get the time to continue building. Because if you look at the end, when he became interim after Amanda Cromwell was placed on administrative leave in the middle of 2022, like June 2022, he kind like, yeah, they hit that terrible Portland Thorns game where they lost like 6-0. It was his second game ever, right? He's just trying to get them to function. Maybe not even play well, just function. Gets them to the break. And then after the break, you see this, right? This big upswing where they, I think, go 7 games unbeaten. Yep. Of course, they ran out of steam at the end of the season. This was not a team that was put together to win a championship and like go all the way through the whole season. And then 2023, a hair's breadth away from winning, but they beat the Houston Dash, but for a wonky result from Angel City. And, you know, we were talking before this podcast about like a divergence in the timeline. I do think that if they had gotten into the playoffs last year, they wouldn't be here this year in this position.
Ooh, that is an interesting take.
I'd buy it.
Is it because you think that they ended the 2023 season with that sort of like rabid, unfinished business? We have something to work toward. Is that sort of the theory there?
You can go far off of spite.
I mean,
the people in this video call right now have felt the hater energy. You can go far off of spite.
Yeah.
But when I went down to Orlando, right, and if you read the article, a lot of the players, they came in, Seb Hines said, like kind of fit already because they had been grinding and going in the off season because the memory of that pain of being this far away was like, I don't ever want to feel that way again. And so they had been working so hard, and you could kind of see it in the way they just launched into 2024. So with that level of motivation, I do still think they'd be on the upswing. You can't deny that. I think they got a really good draft pick with Corey Dyke, who's now a starter and so important shutting down Temo Shawinga in the semifinal. Like, what a job for a rookie. I think they did well with a lot of international signings. Angelina, huge for them. Barbara Banda, obviously, right? So I do think they would have done well, but like, especially that initial oomph, like you get the cold brew in the morning that kind of helps jolt you into the rest of the day. Yeah.
Nitro pride. I love that theory, Steph. And one of the most fascinating aspects of Orlando's journey this season to me is how they've sort of held the duality of being sort of the perpetual archetypal underdogs of the league with the season that they've had and being the big dog in the context of this specific season. But I'm wondering if you can sort of highlight any major moments from this season that, regardless of the result of this final, when we look back on the Pride season, will stand out as these sort of either milestones or turning points when they were either breaking out of that underdog sort of exterior, or when everyone started to take them very, very seriously as a playoff contender, potential NWSL champion.
I mean, obviously the games leading up to the Shield, but I'll tell you what I think has been the most important moment for the Pride this season, and it's losing 2 games. Because remember they talked about it a lot right before, where they're like, so when I went down to Orlando to talk to the players, they were so generous with player availability and time. And I made one request that they said no to, which was, could I sit in on a player meeting even for like 10, 15 minutes, like you've gotten past maybe the important tactical stuff? And they were like, it's a flat no. Everybody's very tense, and they were still unbeaten at the time. And I was like, I completely get that. Player room, like the meeting room, already kind of like a sacred space, right? And then at this time, and I think at that time they were talking about, everyone's saying unbeaten, but like it's so hard to do in this league, in any sport. And then when they lost, I want to say they felt good, but you imagine part of them had to be relieved, right? They all said, you'd rather lose now. And Emily Sam said something really important, which was, it's not just about experiencing losing, but about climbing out of the loss, picking yourself up. So they lose to Portland, they lose to Gotham, honestly pretty badly, did not look good in that game, and then finish the season strong, come into playoffs doing this number instead of having to like maintain, like when you're like, kind of the coffee analogy, right? When you're like kind of still a little bit strung out on caffeine, it can be really hard to maintain that, and then the crash is big. So I think that 2-game loss was super important for them mentally, and being like, we lost, it's fine, nothing bad happened, we can recover. Players rested against Portland, again, nothing bad happened, the bubble popped, we can go into playoffs and just play our game.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that any player, if they had to pick between losing twice in the regular season and then losing in playoffs, is automatically just going to be like, oh yeah, that's fine. We'll take it. Like, we're outrunning a hurricane right now. That's fine. That's not a big deal. I want to talk to you about, obviously there are a lot of storylines around Orlando heading into this championship, having to do with their season, having to do with this turnaround, the investment, all of that. But I think there are two players that have captured people. Barbara Banda, obviously her entrance in the season, and then Marta, who has had like just a peak vintage everything about her this season. So first of all, I want to start, what was it like experiencing that Marta goal in real time at that stadium?
Just mentioning that, Meg, gave me goosebumps.
You might have seen
saying that Marta goal. Thin film of goosebumps on my skin right now. Sorry, Steph,
Yes.
Go ahead.
After that game, I was in my hotel room, just lying in bed on my side, like from multiple angles, watching and rewatching.
I've watched it every time it crosses my feed. I'm like, yeah, I'll watch this again.
Yeah,
of course
sure.
I'll watch this again.
100%.
Easy 10 seconds.
Prestige
like,
television.
Like a dopamine shot. So you might have seen this post game, but someone mentioned you're not supposed to cheer in the press box, right? That's kind of like an American sports standard, and we got rowdy in there. Yeah, how can you not react to something like that? You're not covering sports because you hate it, especially not women's sports. And so watching that happen in real time, I don't know. I almost can't remember it actually happening in front of me. You just remember the feeling associated with it because my memory pathways weren't encoding the engrams due to like the adrenaline flooding my system. I don't
Fair
know.
enough.
Yeah, but I'm super glad I was there.
Yeah, that's fair. But let's talk about Barbara Banda and Marta and their partnership and like what you have seen from them. Again, having been in Orlando, having sat down with Barbara Banda. I mean, Banda has said multiple times that she, admired Marta, right? Like, this is someone that she has looked up to be able to play alongside her. They're now doing like, celebrations together for all of these goals. Banda has popped, I think there were a lot of questions about Banda heading into these playoffs about her productivity and goal scoring. And then she has clearly been like, I read y'all memos. Mm-hmm. I would like to have some words, right? So what should we expect out of these two players in Kansas City?
It feels like a little bit of a cop-out to say this, but I think we should look underneath them to their service. Kansas City got a little bit choked off in their ability to find Tema Shawinga. If you look at her XG from that game, she was not put in good positions to score, and there were a lot of times where it felt a little bit where it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to do this myself, like just dig things, like you pull this team to some kind of result. Dabinia and Michele Cooper notwithstanding, I thought Michele Cooper actually had a pretty good game, but with the Pride, I think you're gonna have to look underneath them to players like Angelina, who when she's clicking, she can really boss a midfield really well. Again, a key signing for them. Or you look at the service from deeper, Kylie Strom dropping that ball. Former Boston Breaker, Kylie Strom, dropping that ball right in the space for Barbara Banda, who of course did an incredible job, like, holding off the defender, essentially pushing her out of the space and being like, don't worry about it. I got this. I think we also need to look at Barbara's ability to provide for Marta. If we watch the Marta goal, it all starts with Barbara Banda doing the hard defensive work.
Yeah. And
right?
sacrificing her body in the process.
Literally throwing herself on the line. So I think this is a team that has a lot of ways to open up channels for several different players. Ali Watt having a really great postseason as well. And then maybe if they can even bring in Summer Yates again, see if she can find some rhythm out there. So I think you've got to look for not necessarily even what they're doing, but what they're enabling everybody else around them to be doing.
And Steph, as we look ahead to this final, especially since we get a chance to pick your brain as someone who has really been able to embed with this team over the course of the season, what is it that we might not be able to see that you have observed that you think makes this team so special? And how do you think they can sort of harness that for this final so that it's meaningful? And obviously, they get the result that they want.
I think it's key after so many games, players come in and they go, we're doing this for Marta. Mm-hmm. There's a sense that, like, I don't think she would say it, but like an overall sense of like she's owed something after all her long years of service. at the Orlando Pride. Like, she's definitely a player who could have sought like a high profile transfer and been like, I want to go somewhere else. I want to go ring hunting. But she's like, I like living in Orlando. I'm going to stick with this team. And then obviously Luana, who came in and, you know, knock on wood, has said her recent scans are clear, but like was battling Hodgkin's lymphoma this season. And so there's a lot of that. And like I said, reacting to the last season, that feeling of like, I never want to feel that way again. I think pursuing, not to quote Inception, but I think pursuing like positive closure will trump like negativity every time. And I think it has flipped from like, I don't want to feel that way again, like the spite of it all, to now like pursuing like, I want to feel like this. Once they get a taste, if they win, if they get that championship taste, you can't maintain it forever. And I do think Seb Hines' next challenge would be like, okay, I can't play the underdog card anymore. Where's the motivation now?
Hey, work for North Carolina for how
What a
long?
great challenge to have. Yeah, I think that, look, I don't want to say Team of Destiny, but there's a little bit of that feeling. You know how around Gotham last year, you kind of felt that momentum behind them for various reasons? It's the same thing here.
All right, Steph, before we let you go, I know that you just said Orlando may be a Team of Destiny if they win a championship, right? Even if they don't. After this season, what is the next piece that Orlando needs to add to this puzzle to make them a more complete team?
Maybe the off the field piece. I look at Inter & Co Stadium, and they had almost 15,000 people, but I know there are a lot of honestly kind of like vibe killer comments about like stadium looks empty. It wasn't empty. It was very loud. It was very rowdy. I liked the atmosphere a lot. You could hear it pulsing even behind. There's thick glass in that press box because the AC has to be kept in, but you could feel it like pressing against you even in there. But I do think for a team that has had Marta, who has a Barbara Banda, who was hosting a home semifinal after an unprecedented season, you would have loved to have seen maybe more. You looked at the Audi audience from the Washington Spirit semifinal, closing in on 20,000 2 games in a row. And so I do think they had to kind of stop the bleeding in the most obvious places, like on the field. They had a high profile signing. You can't argue they're not spending money, right? After 700 and however many $1,000 on Barbara Banda. I just think it was kind of like lower on the list. So I'd love to see more investment in growing their commercial, their fan base, all that sort of stuff locally.
All right, Steph. We'll see you in Kansas City for what we all hope will be a very, very fun and chaotic NWSL Championship.
I'm trying to sleep so much tonight. So much.
Yes, because we will not be when we're in Kansas City.
Nope.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We are now joined by Emily Olsen, lead women's soccer editor at The Athletic, executive producer of this very podcast, a frequenter of the Audi Field press box over the past decade, DC local, my boss, you name it. I got to say nice things about her. Emily, thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate you saying nice things and also telling people exactly why you're saying the nice things.
We value transparency.
Yeah. What are we if not transparent?
Let's talk about the Washington Spirit, because this is a team, obviously, that has been to championships before, both good and bad in their history. But let's talk about this particular team, this 2024 edition, because obviously this has been a very interesting road to this moment, whether it's the takeover of the team from an ownership angle, coaching changes. We just talked about Orlando Pride and how consistency has been the name of the game, whereas for the Spirit, it's change. So let's maybe go through some of those bigger beats taking us to this moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you think, it's interesting how both of these teams actually arrived at very similar rankings and numbers when it comes to all of the statistics at the end of the year when you're talking about possession, goals scored, points breakdown, and averages. But like you said, they've come at it in two different ways. You've got consistency from Orlando, and you've got a controlled chaos from the Washington Spirit. I spoke to Trinity Rodman before the playoffs started, and it's funny because I feel like she is their star player and she embodies what they have gone through, especially in the last 4 years. And it's so interesting for me to hear her say, like, she feels uneasy in the calm. Like, if things were going well, she would feel weird. And honestly, like, does she really know that? No, because her professional career has been chaos from day one. But I do think that there is this kind of sense of, like, you wouldn't survive a day in the asylum that raised me for the Spirit. And to get into specifics, I mean, you talk about the beginning of the year, they're completely rebuilding. I thought personally 2023 was the year in which, you know, they were steadying the ship after 3 different head coaches, after the verbal and emotional abuse allegations from Richie Burke dating all the way back to 2020, and just this rotation, and Mark Parsons being able to be that kind of, here's my philosophy. And then Michele Kang comes in and is like, results weren't good enough. We didn't make the playoffs. You're out. And I saw that as like a what's going on here type move. But obviously there was ambition there, bringing in Geraldes. But then I also came to a pause with like, wait, he's not starting till mid-season? Like, so is this totally chalking up to a rebuilding year? But of course, like, never doubt Michele, apparently. Adrian Gonzalez deserves to be a crucial part of this. And I think if you are able to combine Adrian and Jonah Geraldes into like a single person, they probably would have been in that Coach of the Year finalist, just as the consistency over the season. So I think coming into this again, there was a lot of questions in the offseason, but they showed up consistently. And I think the one difference between previous years and this year is that 99% of the chaos that they faced this year came on the field, that they were overcoming football issues, injury issues, and not that organizational chaos that they'd felt for 3 years.
Which feels like a major sort of institutional accomplishment in a way. I mean, whenever we have faced that chaos in the women's soccer community in the NWSL, we usually end up saying that we hope to one day reach a point where we can just talk about the football, even if there's chaos in the football. So looking at the football, Emily, what would you say were some of the key additions to this roster? I mean, this was an incredibly young team, huge and incredibly successful rookie class. And when I think about what it means to bring on so many young players in the midst of all of this change, even though it might be happening off the field, that sort of makes what the Spirit have accomplished that much more impressive, because you're both, you know, helping these young players adjust to the league, adjust to being professionals, adjust to playing at such a high level immediately through all of these changes. So how do you sort of put that in the context of the Spirit reaching the NWSL Championship?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I will answer that question, I promise, but I do want to turn it on its head a little bit and say that a lot of times you look to the changes as to why a team is doing better from year to year, especially in this year where it's a totally different scenario than last year. But because the Spirit brought in 6 rookies, because they brought in key signings, mid-season, you talk about Lacey Santos, you talk about Ule Sarr, Rose Kawazi, like, those are all these big changes.
Ule Sarr did join the team in 2023, but given her change in form this season in 2024, it feels like this is a season where she arrived.
Oh, 100%. I mean, she did have those injuries the second half of the season, but and yes, she joined June, I think, 2023. And all of the years are blending together because, like I said, the amount that this team has gone through feels like a book that spans 10 years. But yes, Sarr, and I think part of the ability is the pieces that have been added around her and her ability to kind of really come into her own in this team and be an option in attack made the difference. And I think Kawasi was part of that. I think her connection with Trinity was part of that. So, yeah, I absolutely... Let's say mid-season form, new vibe Sarr of 2024 is what we're going with.
I like that.
I also look to the consistency. And even though Andy Sullivan gets injured partway season, she's a crucial consistency. Aubrey Kingsbury, we saw what she can do, and that consistency and some of the shutouts that they've had this year, and her leadership has been crucial. Trinity Rodman. And then you look down at a level from recognition. I wouldn't say tier... or like less than in any other sense than like maybe common knowledge for the fan. And I think about Paige Matera, who was here last season to this season and what she's done. And then Tara McKeown, who you talk about someone who's transformed herself. Like, she went in 2021, the last time that they were in this championship, she was a forward, right? And now she's up there doing the thing as a defender, sure, scoring goals, but she's had that transition. So as much as I look to, and we'll get to, like, the changes that were made, I do think it's important to highlight those, especially those 4 consistent pieces, because this wouldn't have happened without them being able to be the kind of, I guess, core that everything orbited around. Like, you talk about coaching changes and player changes. You still need a core at the middle. Otherwise, you're just free radicals, like, going all over the place. So I do think that is a key part of that. But to answer your question about the changes, it's 2 buckets, right? It's the rookies and it's the mid-season signings. Now, and that's not to overlook Casey Kruger, who has been another consistent veteran and almost like kind of bridges the two. Like, she's both a consistent piece because she's been here before, but she's new to the team. So I put her a little bit in that consistency piece versus the new, and she was able to play the whole season. But the 2 buckets, obviously, we'll talk about the rookies, but I mean, you talk about a goal from all 6 of them at least. You talk about Croy Bethune winning Rookie of the Year on half a season, having 10 assists, 5 goals. I think them showing up is crucial. And then you look at the midseason signings, and we'll talk about turning points, but they're part of that turning point.
Okay, let's talk about turning points because, mid-season signings, Lacey Santos, obviously a big signature signing from the Spirit. I talked with her before the season ended, / like during kind of her injury layoff in September. Injuries have played a role, right, in the season, and I feel like, people looked at the quarterfinal and looked at Bay and looked at the Spirit and said, I don't know, there's maybe a shot here. And then you have Gotham go up against them, and it just kind of feels like the Spirit also, in many ways, have maybe been a little bit of an overlooked storyline this season, because Orlando's obviously dominated the conversation. First half of the season, the Orlando, Kansas City unbeaten streak, back and forth. Gotham owned that off season with the big player signings, and the Spirit have just kind of been here this whole time, just kind of being like, well, you can ignore us if you want to, and we will see you in the final. And so do you think there is maybe that turning point, or has it really just been this season of like, we're getting the job done, we're getting the job done, we're getting the job done, we're over here, guys?
Yeah, I think there was absolutely a turning point. And I think among the kind of Spirit locals, that was always a conversation at the beginning of like, there's an obvious turning point, and that's when Geraldes comes. And that was always going to be the turning point. It was matching up with the Olympic break. There was a Summer Cup that he'd get, a preseason. But then no one could have foreseen that also lined up with basically Croy Bethune's injury.
Yeah.
And that was another part of this. So you have this very clear moment of like, this will make or break the team. And I had questions on, to be fair, and he has proven me wrong, of could Geraldes come into a team that he wasn't coaching every day, put his ego aside, and accept the NWSL for what it is? And he did, because he had Adrian Gonzalez coming in, and not only, the soccer side of things, that was Geraldes. The 2 of them were on the phone every day. Like, he implemented his system. But what Adrian got to do in the first part of the season was experience it firsthand. I've talked to him about travel and physicality and all the things that we know are NWSL that you really don't know until you get here, and where you have to be humble and accept that a Brittany Ratcliffe is going to have to come in the end of the game and squeeze out a win for you. And the other thing that he had was the locker room. I mean, these players were accepting him. They were listening to him. He had this very, this is Adrian, had this very joyful personality about him. And that was where I was like, okay, yeah, the soccer will be consistent, but what about that personality? And I admittedly only know Geraldes, or knew Geraldes, from afar, watching him at FC Barcelona and managing those big personalities. And when he came in, I mean, I think about the moment, I think it was after the Kansas City win, where he like thought one of the microphones looked like a cat and like pet it.
Yeah, I remember.
And that was the moment, truly, when I was like, okay, this guy actually gets it. And like, there's a level of self-deprecation that I wasn't expecting. And that humility kind of transferred into how you watch him approach that game. Now, against Gotham over the weekend, we saw him get frustrated.
Yes.
We saw him feel the wrath of everything that is NWSL.
Yes.
Very welcome to the NWSL.
Yeah, that is very much welcome to the
Including
NWSL
getting
moment.
chased by security at the end of the game, just to add in a sprinkle of chaos in case the game didn't give us that enough. We can't not talk about that.
No, we have to. But
I
like,
wish that there was just like a dedicated camera following him around, just
Right.
in terms of like the full sprint down the field with security trailing after him, that giant hug between him and Corey Bethune that is
So
like
much happening.
pure midair. Like, just live your best life, Short King. Like, let's go.
That was such a tableau.
but like
Yeah.
yeah. So it just, and I think that was an example of like someone who is still learning, and it's gonna take some time. But I will say, like, I think Adrian and him, and I think Adrian deserves equally as much credit as Harald does, because it feels, and I don't know this for a fact, that they came in that mid-season point, or maybe throughout the entire first half, and Jonah was like, tell me what you experienced. And he took that and he listened. And I do know for a fact that Adrian still has a key part in determining tactics and how to play teams. And I think that collective, and the other coaching staff as well, has been really crucial to that. So, yeah, I think it's a joint effort. I think the turning point was mid-season, and it comes with those injuries and that coaching change, and they navigated it. And you saw it in two parts. The first part and the second part do mirror each other very well, and that's because they were able to bring in the mid-season transfers, Kouassi, Sarr, you've got Santos, all contributing to this. But also to bring in the rookies, some of the rookies stepped up mid-season too, and I want to shout out McKenna Morris, who has made it difficult to decide how you fit McKenna Morris and Lacey Santos into a team, and that's not like a given answer now. So I think everyone just understood the assignment, basically. And on paper, the two halves of the seasons are comparable. How they handled it are completely different. And I think the versatility and chaos and change of this team is, again, what got them to the final.
That's a really good point. The Spirit have a sneakily deep bench, I think, in that way, which is easy to overlook because of the youth of the team. There have been so many storylines that we've already touched on throughout this conversation about what makes this Spirit team so special. But one that we haven't touched on in this particular conversation is the massive, massive factor of those home crowds that they've been able to cultivate, and which, in my opinion, seemed like really helped determine that margin that gave them the edge over Gotham in that semifinal. Emily, when you think about what this final means for the Spirit in this particular season, given everything that they've overcome, all the changes that they were able to incorporate pretty gracefully and clearly successfully, how do you sort of capture this moment for this team heading into this championship?
That's a really it's a really difficult question, how to capture it, because again, like I said, like, how do you capture chaos? I think that this moment, I feel like this team, especially in the last 4 years, when we officially shifted from old ownership to Michele Kang ownership, has gone through so many stops and starts. It was like, okay, this change will be the one that sticks. Okay, this change will be the one that sticks. And I think, it's hard to say if this change will be the one that sticks, because year 2 will be a year in which Geraldes will have the whole year to operate himself. There'll be some very tough decisions about which players kind of fit into that starting lineup, and they'll have to fit into a longer vision rather than kind of, I feel like every day they're playing game by game. So I can't say, like, I've learned from watching this team that I'm not going to sit here and be like, this is the one that sticks, because I will be eating my words if I say that. But I think to capture this moment, I think when you see the ambition and you look at this club and you think about it as a project, like, nothing happens in year one. And if you think about it, it's starting in 2021. We're 3.5, 4 years into it. And you're finally seeing how things are clicking together. And those consistent pieces are staying consistent. And the other parts are fitting in where they need to, and they're tinkering where they don't. And that's on the field. Off the field, I'd like to say that this momentum is definitely a moment to capture. You talk about 2 back-to-back sellouts in playoff games, and one coming 72 hours they were able to sell out a stadium, and that's a big deal. I mean, it's easy to look at it and be like, well, yeah, the quarterfinal was so fun, but that has never been a given. Like, we need to take a moment and look at that and be like, this was a moment. Like, being able to turn that crowd was a moment that I think it's easy to accept, of like, of course, this is fun, but it was a moment in itself. So I think in order to capture this entire moment is just to look at it as a project that is finally getting a chance to get off the ground. It's finally past fixing some of the issues we saw in 2020 and being able to address its own problems. Like I said, this is the first year that I felt like all of the issues that happened and all the adversity was on the field, whether that's injuries or style of play or results. And that is what makes this different, is that they're able to address the problems in front of them instead of making up for the issues of the past. And it's just kind of like one of those moments where it's like, look, let's see what they can accomplish when you actually put the team on even footing. Like, oh, you thought that was cool? Well, one of our hands was tied behind our back. Like, watch this. Yeah. So I think that's the best way to kind of describe it.
Yeah, no, Emily, I think that's a perfect place to end it, just because, I mean, again, having been at that championship that they won, right, in a season of just, like, again, change, and not in a fun way in a lot of ways, it's just, like, very nice to see this version of change, even as it is chaotic, even as it is, to Trinity's point, something that they are so accustomed to, they don't know how to function without something changing every couple of days. So we will find out what happens. We will, all be in Kansas City together, waiting to see how this one turns out.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. The table is set. Hopefully the snack menu is adequately designed and you've got your grocery order ready to go for the Orlando Pride facing off against the Washington Spirit in the NWSL Championship this Saturday, November 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, airing on Big CBS and Paramount Plus. Meg, we're here. We're here and we're doing it. We're doing lots of pods too.
We are. Yeah, we're going to have a show for you, basically. You know, we'll be in a recording booth somewhere in that tiny, tiny stadium in Kansas City. We'll find a spot for you. And then we'll have a show for you first thing in the morning after the championship. But obviously, I mean, just based on the semifinals alone, I feel like we're going to have a lot to talk about. So I'm not really worried about what we're going to be doing after that show.
Totally agree. The stories for both of these teams, as we've heard from Steph and Emily, have really been writing themselves this season. And so merging those two things together in the cauldron that is an NWSL championship can only spell, hopefully, the best kind of chaos that we have sort of been working toward this season. Meg, any tips for traveling to Kansas City? It is freezing.
Yeah, I mean, I have been warning everyone that I run into who's going to be in Kansas City, pack layers, right? If you're traveling after you listen to this, add in, if you're a skier or snowboarder, you know, if you have long underwear, I'm just going to say, like, it's going to be cold when the sun goes down. And that is the blessing and the curse of being in primetime now. Kansas City, not necessarily going to be warm. Obviously, you got to get barbecue at somewhere. Yes. But I feel like there's also just a lot happening. Like, you know, the championship, having been at the early ones where there was nothing to do around the game itself, like, fans would be organizing. There's going to be so much more, whether it's like the skills challenge, whether it's, you know, going to a podcast recording from one of our friends and folks. But I feel like everybody except us is doing a live show somewhere. I honestly, like, I don't physically know how I would fit it in my schedule at this point. So I actually don't feel too bad that we are, you know, maybe we'll have it next year. If you would be interested, let us know. Like, right. We can add it to the vision board. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a lot happening. KC's not necessarily like the biggest town either. So I feel like we're going to kind of have like those Louisville vibes where it's just like the town is going to be taken over in a really fun and good way. So
yeah, one of my favorite things about championships is how they are this like converging ground for people who are super active in like women's soccer, social media, who are able to actually meet each other in person. If not for the first time, it has like strong reunion vibes. I'm looking forward to that.
I mean, we're going to like the full podcast crew is going to be together for the first time ever in Kansas City. So that's exciting too.
Seriously, the first time I saw Leah in person when we recorded was a very special moment. So multiply that by like 3 more people, and maybe and 4, including Steph too. It's going to be a party. It's going to be a party for all of us, from the teams that are playing to all of you who are going to be showing up. Make sure that you're writing us. I would love, you can never have too many barbecue recommendations in a city like Kansas City. So make sure that you put us on to where we need to be eating, getting our coffee, refueling, hanging out. Reach out to us. Make sure that you're signed up for the free newsletter. Also, because maybe we'll be touching on some of these things in the newsletter as well, theathletic.com/fulltime. Hopefully by now you're following us on socials. But we cannot wait. Yeah. We've made it.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the game real quick. Just real quick. Because what has been a little funny is I think there will be this idea of KC fans who bought tickets thinking that their team might be in it, I do think are going to be very partisan against Orlando for a lot of reasons, right? Like, we've got some spice. They just got knocked out. So I think the KC fans might migrate to a Washington Spirit fandom for the day. And then what has been interesting, and this is just like purely kind of anecdotal evidence, but every neutral, right, quote unquote, fan that I talk to who isn't a KC person or Orlando or Washington, I think is skewing a little Orlando right now, because I think there is this win it for Marta, right? And I think that's so interesting, because I think we had it both ways in 2023, where you had Ali Krieger and Megan Rapinoe. And so there was kind of this like, well, there's not really a bad way for this to end. And now there is kind of this big momentum around Marta winning another trophy, and the big one in the NWSL.
That's a good point. Even the fact that in both championships there was a neutral ground for that to kind of like foster is so true.
This is going to be neutral, but I think it's going to be a little, it's like poisoned neutral ground.
And it's interesting to think if Marta hadn't scored what I think henceforth should just be referred to as that goal. I mean, that was like, if she were to be campaigning for anything, that goal really swung.
I mean, do you think that goal gets nominated for Puska's award?
Ooh, I mean, it has to.
I feel like it's gotta be a top candidate, right?
It has to. It was a work of art. Like, we were talking about how every time we saw a new angle, a new like representation of it, I've seen like live action animations of the goal, and I want to watch every single one. And that, even with bangers, Olympicos, whatever, like that doesn't happen often. So it's gotta be. It's a superlative goal. It's a superlative goal.
Meanwhile, though, Washington Spirit have the baby Mira energy, right? Like, that's the opposing narrative.
I mean, baby Mira's starting her own unbeaten streak, which is like phenomenal. Yeah, phenomenal way to just like begin life.
Right.
And we have heard that she is going to be now flown out to the game, which is pretty like objective boost.
Yeah, for those of you not terminally online.
Congratulations, first of all.
Yeah, congrats first. But there is a baby who has been to a whole bunch of Washington Spirit games at Audi Field, who currently is holding an unbeaten streak and has, you know how like the Mets had the like little pumpkin during their run, right? Like, you know, you need a little mascot energy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just the fact that it's the Spirit and everything that they've accomplished this season in terms of their home crowd, it's kind of sweet for them to be able to bring literally like a tiny bit of that to Kansas City. And I mean, between that and the like spirit of Marta wanting this, even if you just put those two things up against each other, it's hard to predict. I mean, we're not even going to predict.
I'm not going to predict.
So much bigger than a prediction, you know?
It's 1 versus 2. right? Like, two best teams in the league. Again, there's no such thing as an underdog in these final couple of games. Yeah, I'm just I want the Orlando Pride versus KC vibes, and not this like I don't know if I want to go through a penalty shootout in person. At
My
the
stomach just
I'm okay.
lurched
I'm
at the
okay. Thank
mention.
you. Like Aubrey, I would enjoy seeing Aubrey Kingsbury doing Aubrey Kingsbury things.
Sure.
But also, I am probably gonna want to go to bed. So
Yeah.
just manifesting. 90 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, 90 minutes with probably an inevitable, like, 15 combined of stoppage
20
time.
plus sub stoppage.
A whole other conversation we can have about how much more soccer we've been watching this season, but we'll save that for the off season. Now we are preparing for this championship. We've got packing to do. We're going to head out, and we'll see you guys in Kansas City. My name is Tamerra Griffin, and I've been joined by Meg Linehan. You've been listening to Full Time with Meg Linehan. You can catch me doing some last-minute shopping for those little travel-sized toiletries, probably. But I will be sharing my tips, if I can, on Twitter and Instagram.
Yep, definitely hit us up if you've got any I was in Kansas City for the first game of the year, so I feel like I have some barbecue ideas. We'll see how it goes. Again, a lot of things are happening, so a lot to consider as we get to KC. But you can email us at fulltime@theathletic.com if you think we need some tips.
Full Time does not happen without our podcast producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer, Leah Griffin, and executive producer, Emily Olsen. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in your feed Sunday morning as soon as we finish recording that NWSL Championship Saturday night. We'll see you then.